capital, from Yemen, from Morocco, from Belarus, from Prussia, from all over the world. They came back, and it wasn't an easy visit. You couldn't use your American Express card to get a hotel room. It was Jerusalem under the Ottoman Turks. They came back nonetheless. They were faithful to their ancient city. Now, with Israel's rock-solid legal case under international law in its claim to Jerusalem, with that demographic history, with the fact that the freedom of Jerusalem is protected under Israel, Jerusalem is still in peril. It's not in peril because of armies invading Jerusalem again. We have the problem of Iran, which I'm not going to address. Others have spoken about that. It's in peril because of our own internal behavior, because of our lack of conviction about Jerusalem. Do you know that in the year 2000, not far from Washington, D.C., President Clinton convened a summit meeting at Camp David with Prime Minister Ehud Barak and the PLO chairman, Yasser Arafat, and we almost lost Jerusalem at Camp David in July of 2000. Proposals were put on the table to divide the old city, to put the Temple Mount in the hands of Yasser Arafat, to put the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in the hands of Yasser Arafat. And perhaps it was a modern-day miracle that Arafat turned down those proposals. But the ghosts of Camp David still hover in the capitals of Europe and even in parts of Washington, D.C. And they may come back to haunt us if we're not vigilant. This year, for example, we heard about a new peace plan called the Saudi peace plan, widely accepted in the corridors of the United Nations, supported by many of the leaders of Europe. And even there's a cheering squad in Washington that from time to time talks about the Saudi plan. Now, the Saudis have already distanced themselves from this plan. But look how quickly the Saudi plan attracts attention. What did the Saudis call for? A full Israeli withdrawal to those 1967 lines from which Israel was attacked 40 years ago. And you go back to the 67 borders, you know what happens to Jerusalem? It becomes redivided. The old city goes to whoever represents the Arab side. Today, that's not only the Fatah movement, that includes Hamas. Do we want to put the old city of Jerusalem under the rule of Hamas? Well, it's good we hear it here. Now we have to hear it everywhere. But let me tell you one other point. I made the statement earlier of the prayers we say for the reunification of Jerusalem. And those prayers signal the perception of the Jewish people that the 67 war and Jerusalem's reunification were a modern-day miracle. It's important for us to tell the world that you don't try and reverse miracles. You don't try to roll back miracles. You cannot roll back miracles. Now, if that's so clear, and the legal case is so crystal clear, why do people come forward to redivide Jerusalem? What's pushing the chancelleries of Europe to consider this idea? In my judgment, there is a dangerous false assumption in the air that if Israel withdraws further from the territories it captured in a war of self-defense, and I emphasize in a war of self-defense, that will somehow help the Western alliance lower the flames of the rage of radical Islam. As Israel withdraws, so the argument goes, Al-Qaeda is diplomatically defeated. This theory is total rubbish. And you know what? Unfortunately, we had to go through an experiment to prove it. It was called Gaza disengagement. Israel made every effort possible to advance what we always call the peace process. We unilaterally pulled out of the Gaza Strip. Many in the world expected that the Palestinians would exploit this moment. They inherited our agribusiness in northern Gaza. They'd export cherry tomatoes to Europe. They'd develop those rich gas fields offshore that are under the control of British Gas. That they would create a new reality in the Gaza Strip, shorefront property, hotels, Dubai on the Mediterranean. Well, when the Palestinians gained control of the Gaza Strip after Israel's withdrawal in August 2005, within a very short amount of time, January 2006, that moderation didn't emerge. Hamas was elected by the Palestinian people to rule the Palestinian Authority. Rather than lowering the flames of Islamic rage and motivation, we fed that motivation with our unilateral withdrawal. And if Hamas rose from our lack of will and from our pullback from the Gaza Strip, imagine what would happen if we withdrew in Jerusalem. Imagine the tsunami of terror that could be set off as a result of such a breakdown of national will on Israel's part and such an imposition on Israel on the part of the West. Let me close with another observation, basically two interrelated observations. Number one, tragically, what we are seeing in recent years is an evil wind spreading across the Middle East. We first saw signs of it in the Bamiyan Valley in Afghanistan when ancient Buddhist statues 2,000 years old were destroyed by the Taliban. But we've seen that religious sites across the Middle East have lost their traditional immunity. Shiite mosques are blown up in Iraq and in Pakistan on a regular basis. The tomb of Joseph in Nablus was ransacked, burned, and attacked. The Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem was entered forcibly by a joint unit of Hamas and Fatah. All this points to one very clear danger, that if Israel lost its nerve and gave up Jerusalem, the forces that would take over the old city would be forces of darkness, not forces of light. That the holy sites of mankind would be threatened. And I leave you with one very clear message. Only a free and democratic Israel can protect the holy sites of Jerusalem for all faiths, for Jews, for Christians, and for Muslims. And therefore, if you want to protect Jerusalem, you've got to support and help us support Israel retaining Jerusalem, united under the sovereignty of Israel. I close with one last line. In the year 135, a Jewish general named Bar Kokhba, which is Aramaic for son of the star, led a revolt against the Roman Empire. He liberated Jerusalem, and he minted coins in 135 on which was written in ancient Hebrew, "For the freedom of Jerusalem." The Roman Empire feared the rise of the Bar Kokhba revolt and brought legions, between 4 and 6 legions, to crush it, which they finally did at Beitar. And why were the Romans so determined to extinguish the drive for the freedom of Jerusalem? Because they were afraid that the freedom of Jerusalem would be a beacon for all the peoples of the Roman Empire. And therefore, they did what they could to destroy it. They did what they could to even erase the memory of Judea, renaming it Palestina. And they did what they could do to keep the Jews out of Jerusalem for 500 years. The Jewish people, back in the year 135, were on the side of the freedom of Jerusalem. And today they are again on the side of the freedom of Jerusalem. So let's keep Jerusalem free.